Yep, I'm in a tin shed and it's passing down outside. So I'm into putting the first of the plugs onto this loom. It's all covered up with the braid. I'd normally start with the crank sensor. However, today I'm going to start with the injector plugs. I'm running ID injectors, injector dynamic injectors, and they are polarity sensitive. Well, they're marked with a positive, so I'm going to connect them correctly. Normal injectors aren't normally worried about which way they go. However, I often copy the factory wiring. I've gone through also and drawn some little pictures, my own hieroglyphics of each plug. Injectors are pretty easy, coils are pretty easy, but I've got the difference between the VVti 1UZ and the 3UZ or later small coils. There's a difference in the center pins. Also with injectors, it's important to check the impedance. Toyota are quite nice because if you hold the injector itself with the clip at the top, if the little tabs on the side are at the top, it's a high impedance, and if the tabs are at the bottom, then it's a low impedance. With some of the ECUs, impedance will matter, the amount of resistance across the coils. The Thunder, it does peak and hold, so it's not really a problem. I can run either high impedance or low impedance. There's also two different kind of injector plugs for the Toyotas. There's a small one, which is a Nippon Denso one, and there's the bigger one, which is a Toyota. I think it might have been Sumitomo, but one of the wiring guys will tell me about that. I've started with those injectors. I've crimped the wires, and I haven't forgotten to put the little rubber on each of the wiring, and I've put a piece of shrink wrap onto each one of the outlets. So on with the rubbers. Strip and strip. And I'm doing all my stripping first, and then I'm going through and doing my crimping. Or I generally find before the stripping, the rubbers, it is better if you put your rubbers on. In many aspects of life. And I am worried when I get to the end, and I'm sure I've put all my rubbers on the other side, and I've got one injector left to do and 3 rubbers. So with all the wires stripped, I'm going through crimping. And so the rubber boot sits into the back. There's the main crimp for the wire, and then the rest of the crimp is crimped onto the seal. And try not to drop the terminals. Can't put it in my mouth because then I won't be able to talk. I've got a special set of crimpers here that work on these little crimps perfectly, and everyone is checked. And I work my way through doing every single crimp, and then we are going to pop it into some plugs, or connectors. I should call them connectors. All of my injector wires are now terminated with the seal, and it turns out I had an extra pair, an extra seal and an extra terminal in my packet, so I'm really happy that there are some spares, because it's not a terminal that I use a lot of. So I'll hide that away with my other spare set of US car plugs. So now it's time to pop the terminals into the connectors. Normal injectors don't care about which way around they go. However, if a manufacturer does make a recommendation, then I do generally follow it. ID do have a recommendation, so I'm going to pop the positive, in this case is going to be in pin 2. Which I think is the same as the Toyota ones. No. Oh yes. A lot of the Toyota ones are also have the power, the 12 volt supply in pin 2 as well, with the trigger in pin 1. But the Toyota ones don't actually matter. And in different models, they do actually swap them around. Right, so let's put some terminals in. So these are marked like this. Number 1 is actually on the connector, and they're labelled on. These are all backwards. Oh, great. So Toyota's normally 1 here, 2 here, but this one is 1 right here. Double check, like a builder, measure twice, cut once. Number 2 is definitely the 12 volt, pink for the 12 volt, and it's further away from the clip, and I probably should crimp that one. Tip of the day, deliberate tip of the day of course, make sure you also crimp the terminal around the seal. Check it clips in properly and put the lock in the front. And we go through the whole lot doing exactly the same. Injectors, done. Now I think I'll move on to the coils. So let's have a look at those. So this is one of those boring jobs, but it still has to be done. The plugs have had the feedback loop, so pin 2, blanked off with little rubber blankers. And then I've got my Black Panther shears here, which is strange because they're red. And I'm removing the real tape off each terminal. And I've also sorted the power wire and the earth wire have a bigger crimp terminal than the trigger wires, just to make it fun. And it's important that you get it right, which is a little trick that can catch people out when they're going through the job. And we'll have 8 left over that we don't use. These are actually one of my favourite tools for wiring now. It's funny, different tools we have. I've got my special set of crimpers that I use for my little terminals. I've got side cutters, of course, nice sharp ones. And every now and then I throw them away and get some new ones. These little tools. Little Tyco or TE electronics tool. Definitely one of my favourites. And my Black Panthers, which are red. And these ones are 7-inch. Mike, who helps me out, he suggested that they are sharp enough to cut the pubes off a rhino. Yeah, I'd kind of agree. Not that I want to go near rhino pubes. Funny enough, the red ones are 7 inches and the black ones are 8 inches. Story of my life. Right, we've got terminals cut. We've got plugs with the feedback loop blanked. Let's go through and crimp some coil wires, shall we? So same deal with all the crimps for the coils. Check every single one is tight. Correct size rubber onto the correct size wire. Correct size terminal onto the correct size wire. And onto the next one. So a lot of the time when you're doing a job like this, it's quite a big time commitment, especially building from scratch, and when you're wanting it as perfect as you can get it. But it is worth doing that, taking the time to do it properly. My engine is all numbered up, so I pretty much have to, my brain turns off when I'm doing this for a lot of the mundane stuff like the crimping of the wires. Normally the radio's on and I can just zone out, check each wire as I go through and get it done. Coil connector time. I'm using the smaller, we're going to call them, should we call them rectangle plugs? More than the more oval plugs. I've done a diagram for each because between the two of them, the center pins reverse. I've seen a few guys who have tried to swap with a standard computer from early coils to late coils and they wouldn't go. And it's quite funny when they get towed and I'm like, the pins swap around. So, looking at these, pin 1, this is the later model coil, throws 3UZ or late 1UZ VVti after 2000. Pin 1 is 12 volts. Pin 2 we're not going to use. That's the feedback loop. Pin 3 is the trigger from the ECU. So it goes to the ignition outputs. And I should say too that both ignition and coil, oh that's the same. Ignition and injector are wired in cylinder order. So number 1 injector goes to number 1 cylinder. Number 1 coil goes to, number 1 ignition output number 1 goes to number 1 coil. Cylinder order. Might sound funny, but past ECUs haven't always been like that. Okay, so that's pin 3 goes to the ECU and pin 4 is to the earth. So let's do this. Pin 1 is 12 volts. Pin 2 is not used. Pin 3 is the trigger, so that's my little green wire, and pin 4 is my chassis earth. I'm wanting a nice positive click on all of them and then put the lock down. We'll do another one. Well, I'm going to do a whole lot more than just one. 12 volts. Put it in the right way. Trigger. Earth. Put the lock on. Righto, 2 down, 6 to go. Righto, so we're starting to get a bit of a form here down to the injector. It flows up to the coils. I've done that on all the cylinders. And this one I've zip tied the coil wiring down with the injector wiring, sort of flowing it down towards that injector. Right, that is looking pretty good. Right, let's do the AVIS. So that's the intake manifold runner flap. So on my one, I've connected the AVIS to auxiliary output number 3. I hope. I'll have a look. Yes. So auxiliary output number 3 as a general purpose output. I've done a few videos on the AVIS flap and how it works. And my test engine the other day was working intermittently, and it seems that the solenoid on that one has failed as well. Just proves my point that it is a common failure, so it's often a good idea to replace it. And I think I might just put one in this pack with this ECU, just to future-proof it and make sure it is reliable. Okay, AVIS. So one side is voltage, and one side is the switch from the ECU. Technically, it doesn't matter which way around. So I put the plug on the AVIS, and I was about to tell you that number 1 is the 12 volts, and I looked at it and realized that I had it round the wrong way. So we'll just change that around. Now number 1 is the 12 volts. Here we go. And number 2 is the trigger from the ECU. The trick was a lot of the VVti standard have white as the power, as the voltage. And that's very much like the VVti solenoids on the front of the engine, one each side. This is the right hand. You can see it's got the right. The other one's the left hand. I've already stripped. The connectors are the same as the crank sensor. If you're using the universal type crank sensor, the later model crank sensor. They've got a dual slot in them. We'll have a look at that in just a mo. It's fighting me. And don't forget to put your heat shrink on your braid. So number 1 is voltage, that one. And number 2 is the trigger from the ECU. This one wants to fight me. Here we go. And the same for this VVti sensor. Solenoid, I should call it the solenoid, shouldn't I? It isn't critical, again, on the polarity of these. It is just a solenoid. They will work either way. That one didn't fight me so much. My plan is to drop it down like this. I did remember the shrink wrap. Don't worry, guys. My plan is to drop it through here. And up like that. The routing of the wires is a personal choice. And I'm always interested to watch how different guys have run their wires. Trying to keep them all neat, tidy, together, going in the same direction is kind of the trick. So if it looks good, we're going to call it good. Cam and crank sensors next. Now, cam and crank sensors and the VVti sensors in the middle of the heads, they are critical that they are the correct way around. Polarity is important. So make sure you get this right. I helped a guy out a little while back. I was in the States at the time and he was in Canada, and he told me a couple of issues. And I thought possibly that his cam sensor was around the wrong way, or one of the sensors was around the wrong way. He sent me a scope pattern, and he'd actually sent me a timing map, and I looked at it and it didn't make sense to me. And from that timing map, the ignition timing map, I deduced that something was wrong in that department. Turned out the cam sensor was wired incorrectly. I might even be able to bring up a picture of the scope pattern that he sent me, maybe. I'll have a bit of a search through. So this might have a picture of a sensor. Basically, the scope pattern was going the wrong way. Let's get into these crank sensor. I've got shielded wire. So this one, it's easy. I've just got the two wires. Cam sensor is here. So it goes down to this plug here. And it has got a shielded wire. So I'm going to trim the sleeve back, pull the braid back, cut the braid back under here, put a bit of shrink wrap on it, and just have the two wires on the end. And the same for the crank sensor going down the front. So the crank sensor is down here doing the same. And these are really good because the outside pin is the signal, pin 1. So that's quite easy for me to remember as signal. And signal was number 1, signal was number 1. So that's cool. Let's get into it. More prep work done. These motors make an amazing table. So I've got all my plugs laid out on the top of the plenum, and we've got our shrink wrap on because we don't want to forget that. So here it's slit back. Really important that you get all the wires. There's nothing left over. Put a little bit of shrink wrap over like so, and shrink that up. I didn't strip my wires. Don't drop the seals everywhere, that'll be a mess. Hey, you guys didn't remind me to put the seals on. And we pop the plug on. So the positive is in number 1. And the earth is in number 2. Hey, I didn't crimp that. Done. Moving to the next one. See, amazing table. The crank sensor goes to trig number 1 on the ECU. The cam sensor at the front goes to trig number 2. The center cam positions go to digital 1 and digital 2. Any of the digitals will work. Again, this one, number 1 for the signal, number 2 for the earth. And the earths for both of these sensors is joined by the ECU. I'm going to do the same here on both sides. And that will be the cam and crank sensor inputs. As I said, polarity conscious, very, very important because it'll change the signal otherwise. And that will change the timing. If you get either of the center ones wrong, you could get VVti faults. If you have the cam timing wrong, which I've had, someone else did one, and the cam timing was wrong, and the VVti was bringing up faults. So that was some interesting ones. Interesting diagnosis. Right, let me do some work, and we'll be back to you really soon to do the throttle motor and the throttle position sensors and accelerator position sensor. The 1UZ VVti runs a drive-by-wire throttle body. The 3UZ also runs a drive-by-wire throttle body. There's quite a difference between them. The 1UZ has the accelerator position sensor on the throttle body, actuated with a cable. And it has a clutched motor within the drive-by-wire. So there's a few tricks to it when setting up with a link. Right now, what we're going to do is connect some pins to the throttle body, and it's going to work. I might do another video another day on the bit more of the setup, because that's probably something that should be done in the link setup. So I've got diagrams for it. I'm going to start with the accelerator position sensor and pop some wires in and pop some pins in. We have the APS plug, and that is the same as the 4-litre, the early VVti plugs. What are we doing? Number 1. Is a position sensor, the sub sensor. Number 2 is the main. And they go back to, I didn't pull a clip out. Got to pull a clip out. The lock. They'll go back to the ECU on AN volts. Number 3 is an earth. Goes back to the sensor earth on the ECU. Number 4 is 5 volts. Easy. And yes, I did remember my shrink wrap. Yep, that's going to work. While I'm here, I'm going to pop the EFI temp sensor in. I've swapped to a Bosch one. It is not polarity conscious. It also doesn't want to go together today. There it is. Clip, clip. I've already done the alternator plug. Woo, woo. Bit of a helicopter there. Right, round to this side. Throttle motor. Probably need the connector. Get the connector. Clips out. Plugs in like that, which is upside down. 1 and 2 are throttle motor positive and negative. Three, throttle clutch. 4, to an auxiliary output on the ECU, which will be set to a PWM. We'll explain that on setup. And yes, I've remembered my shrink wrap. And throttle position sensor. So the throttle position sensor is located down here, which is a pain to get at. But Toyota made this little adapter here that fits up here like this. Oh, look at that. So we put the plug on it. I've put it on the top of the engine. Got the plug. Got the little book of words. And number 1 on this plug relates to number 1 on the throttle position sensor. Number 1 is 5 volts. Number 1 is 5 volts. Number 2 is one of the signals, the main TPS signal. Number 3 is the second, is the sub TPS signal. And number 4 is the earth. And yes, I remember my shrink wrap. Look at that. So, and clip in, it plugs in here. Okay, that's awesome. We'll clip on the map sensor. The map sensor's got a Deutsch plug. And it's got the writing on it, the pinout on it. So we've got a 5 volt. in number 1. Small rush of heartbeat as I was wondering if I'd remembered the shrink wrap. Second one, here we go, sensor, and then a sensor ground. And then we pop the lock in. That's going to have a bracket about there with a vacuum hose running down to there. I could have mounted it further forward. There's lots of places I could have mounted it, but I just always mount it there. Right, I've got an air temp sensor, just a Bosch plug again, not polarity conscious. It's air temp, oil temp. So for both of those, the air temp is going to get that sensor there, fast acting Bosch one that can be welded on the intake tube. And the oil temp is this one here, another Bosch. We're actually thinking we might put it in here, change that to a plug and screw it in there. But it is long enough if we want to put it back in the sump. The engine's got a rear sump on it, the one that we're working on. Not this one, the other one we're working on. Right, we've got a couple of pressure sensors. These are really easy. Pin 1, 0 volts. Pin 2, 5 volts. Make sure it clips. You just don't want to go in. And the bottom one is the signal. And fuel pressure. It's in here somewhere. Oh, there it is. Same deal, 0 volt. Five volt. And signal to the ECU. Come on. And pop the little cover on. Done. And yes, I remember my shrink wrap. Right, I'm running out of sensors on the engine. Oh, there's that air temp in the back. We've got these back ones to do, but the main engine, oh, I've already done the air temp on the back. Oh, that one plugs in over there. So here's what our loom's looking like. This comes down the front. Cam angle sensor tucked in there. APS, water temp into here. Of course, if you're doing it in a car, you'll want to run the one for the gauge as well, fit a sender. Alternator down there. I'm pretty happy with that. AVIS up in here. Factory, they run the accelerator position sensor across the top here. I do away with that and I pop in through the side, tuck it in. So I've got a couple of earths to put on the front here. There's some here. There it is. That'll look good. I think that's how that's going to sit. It's time for me to terminate up the earth. I'm going to put the wideband plugs on the back of the engine and sort that stuff out. And I'll just give you a quick brief of how we've done that. I think I've managed to fit all the plugs onto the engine loom now. Just done the earths up into here on both sides. And I put the wideband plugs on at the back here. Now the widebands underneath, like this, aren't ideal. So these manifolds are designed as a standard replacement with the sensor in the standard place. However, these widebands prefer to be at the top. I've got the big long wideband lead, so I think one day hopefully the sensors may end up sort of down here like this in the top. Well, not actually bang in the top, off to the side a little bit, down by the gearbox a bit more. With that done, it's now time to connect it into the ECU. And I'm going to wrap up this video here.